So with Borderlands 4 right around the corner, there's still one question that I think needs answered. Should Borderlands be a live service game? Now, for me personally, I want more Borderlands content, I want more events, and I want more reasons to continuously be playing the game. And while that may give a bit of a hint in which direction I would be going for, I do think there's actually quite a lot of information potentially pointing towards the other direction. And in this video, I also want to go over some of the previous Borderlands entries to also see if previous Borderlands games could be considered live service anyway. And when I'm talking about live service games, I'm talking about games that are continuously updated, have continuous new stuff being added in, constantly have events, constantly have balancing patches, and are just constantly giving you more and more things to do to keep you playing the game. Now, I know a lot of people would generally just go to something like Warframe or Destiny 2 because those are both looter shooters as well, but I would more so go for MMOs and more specifically something like World of Warcraft. World of Warcraft has been around for 20 years. MMOs are generally always live service games, and something as successful as World of Warcraft has actually been one of the big reasons why there's been so many new live service games over the years. They see a game being able to make $1 billion a year for 20 years, and all of the companies want in on that money. So that's something I would point more towards, is something like World of Warcraft or any other MMO that's continuously updated. And I think the Borderlands franchise has had a bit of an identity crisis even back since Borderlands 2, and I think that'll make more sense as we go through a lot of the updates and DLCs for some of these previous titles. And a good place to start is just going back to Borderlands 2, because if you don't remember how much stuff was actually added in Borderlands 2's life, it was pretty crazy, and they sold you pretty much everything. So you had tons of big size DLCs, Captain Scarlet and her pirate's booty, Mr. Torg's campaign of carnage, Sir Hammerlock's big game hunt, Tiny Tina's assault on Dragon Keep, those being a lot of the bigger DLCs, and that's not even all of them. But then you also had things like the Headhunter packs, so TK Baha's Bloody Harvest, you had How Marcus Saved a Mercenary Day, you had Sir Hammerlock and the Son of Cromorax, and a lot of these Headhunter packs basically being events you would find in live service games, except a Headhunter pack you also had to pay for. Now, they were pretty cheap, but you did have to pay for them. Then you had the DLC class packs that were basically just buying the DLC characters. Then you also had a ton of cosmetic packs for the different characters where you would get a head cosmetic and a skin cosmetic for that character. There were a tons of different ones of those for pretty much all the Vault Hunters in the game. And then you also had some other miscellaneous content, but pretty much all of this additional content of Borderlands 2 was paid. Pretty much everything I just went over was paid when it came out, and you really didn't get much for free in Borderlands 2. But then we go to Borderlands 3, and there was a lot of content in this as well, and I think at Borderlands 3 they moved even more towards being a pseudo live service product. But the funniest thing about Borderlands 3 was you actually had to pay for a lot less. So in Borderlands 3 you had Season Pass 1, which you could also get with the more expensive versions of the game on launch. Season Pass 1 had 4 DLCs in it, then Season Pass 2 later down the road had 2 DLCs, the Designer's Cut and Director's Cut. Then Borderlands 3 also had a ton of additional updates. First off, they had a bunch of balancing updates, they had a bunch of overhauls to systems, they had tons of quality of life even later in its life. I think even in the past year they've had some additional quality of life elements. Then you had the seasonal events, you had Bloody Harvest, Broken Hearts Day, Revenge of the Cartels. Something like Bloody Harvest, basically the events from Borderlands 2 or Borderlands 3 version, but all of those were free. You had the 2 takedowns, the Maliwan takedown being one of my favorite pieces of Borderlands content in the entirety of the franchise. The Guardian takedown, not as good, but these were basically the first attempts for Borderlands to have a kind of a raid style content in the franchise. Still soloable, a pretty good first attempt at an actual raid. Then you just had a bunch of other like smaller updates like the Science Machine and the Black Market. So you had a ton of content in Borderlands 3 as well, moving more towards a live service game, but you had to pay for for a lot less. You pretty much only paid for the season passes. There are also some additional skins that you can buy in Borderlands 3 later into its life as well, similar to Borderlands 2, but for a good amount of this content, you didn't have to pay for it. And a big reason I'm going over all of this is because I think Borderlands has an identity crisis. I think they're kind of in this middle point between being a kind of more story-driven single player or co-op experience, something more akin to a lot of single player games. Like let's say you go to The Witcher 3, you pretty much just got The Witcher 3 and then you got a big DLC down the road and then another big DLC, and that's pretty much all you got. They did some update stuff, but they didn't really add in a ton of additional content. You go over to, say, a lot of Bethesda games, they would release a game, you would get a DLC down the road, then another DLC and another DLC. They still work more like a single player game. You get the game on the release, you get a DLC down the road, you get maybe a handful of additional DLCs on the road, and that's pretty much all you get. But then you go to the live service side, and live service side is you're just constantly getting new content. Like if you compare this to modern World of Warcraft gets a new content patch every 8 weeks now, and that's on top of getting the massive amount of new content every 2 years with a new expansion, and then all of the other pretty consistent events and experimental stuff. So with a live service game, you're constantly getting updates, constantly getting new content, constantly getting balance changes, and then the single player games, you basically just get the game, then you pay for DLC down the road. But the last few entries of Borderlands kind of being in the middle, I think has actually been an issue, because you have one side of the player base that wants it to just be that kind of story-driven, single-player-esque experience where you buy the game, get a DLC down the road, get another DLC down the road, and it's not really a live service product. We even saw this with Borderlands 3 where they were balancing the game and doing overhauls of systems, and a lot of people didn't like the balancing of the game. They just want it to be how it is, and then you get DLC down the road. Then you have people in the other camp, which I would probably put myself in, where it's kind of like a live service game, but you're not actually going full into the live service elements, so you're not getting enough content, you're not getting enough reasons to continuously come back to playing the game, and you're not getting those big evergreen features to try to push you to continuously playing the game. And if I did distill my thoughts on this down to a single sentence, it would be that I want more Borderlands content and I'm willing to pay for it. So I do think, at least for me and how I play games, I think Borderlands 4 or upcoming Borderlands games going to basically being a full live service game would be what I would want over being in the middle point they're at now. But I do think we're probably not actually going to get that in Borderlands 4. If I would have to guess, Borderlands 4 is probably going to be very similar to Borderlands 3. You're probably going to have like a season pass with like 4 DLC in it that's going to be announced with the pre-orders, and then later down the road, if the game's successful and there's people still playing it and willing to buy DLC, they'll probably do another season pass, and they'll probably have some other seasonal events. They'll probably do some amount of balancing stuff, and then maybe some system overhauls if something is really bad but the game is still popular. So pretty akin to what we see in Borderlands 3, but in my opinion, I think the game would be better, and I think it would probably be more successful over a longer period of time if they just kind of bit the bullet and went fully into live service instead of being in this weird middle ground. And one of the reasons I think Borderlands 4 isn't going to go fully live service and is going to be similar to Borderlands 3 is because back in July 2024, Randy Pitchford actually made a post on Twitter talking about a potential Borderlands MMO. And he said, assuming such a thing is separate from and in no way imposes on a numbered sequel campaign style Borderlands game, would you be interested in a Borderlands MMO / truly live service type of game? Now, this is just a Twitter poll with under 20,000 votes, but it was pretty split between yes and no. There was a good amount of people in maybe and probably in the middle, but yes and no were pretty similar in around 30%. But I think this was also trying to indicate that an upcoming numbered Borderlands game would not be an MMO / truly live service game. This was also before Borderlands 4 was officially announced. We had already been getting talks that it was in development, but we never got the official reveal trailer or anything. So I think that's probably why he worded it like this, that it would not affect another numbered sequel Borderlands game. But going back to a potential Borderlands MMO, that would be legitimately exactly what I wanted. I think a full-scale Borderlands MMO where you could be fighting a boss with dozens of people, you could have 100 people in a zone, would be legitimately incredible. It would obviously have to do a lot of work to change the Borderlands formula. I personally think having a holy trinity would work the best with a tank, healer, DPS, and probably actually having support thrown on top of that as well to be able to like give people ammo or generate buffs and stuff like that. I think that would be the best for an MMO like this. I think you already have a lot of elements of that through previous Borderlands games, and I think that would just work in a much more large scale full MMO Borderlands game. But taking it back to Borderlands 4, I don't think it's going to be a full live service game. So again, just to reiterate, in my opinion, I would much more like it if Borderlands 4 is a full live service game. But again, as we just went over, I don't think it's going to be. So if you're somebody that just wants it to be more towards that kind of single player-esque game where it's just release the game, then release DLCs on the road, Borderlands 4 is probably going to be closer to that, but it's still probably going to be like Borderlands 3 kind of in the middle. But we'll just have to wait and see to get further information. But that's all I want to go over. So thanks for watching.